Anybody who has the guts to get in the octagon deserves some recognition, but there are some legendary names that leave their mark on UFC history. For those fighters, we have the UFC Hall of Fame. These are the mixed martial artists who changed the game forever. But who were the first fighters to make it? We're going through the first 5 martial artists to achieve UFC Hall of Fame immortality. This is Ultimate MMA. Royce Gracie came into the UFC at the very beginning and made everybody pay attention to jiu-jitsu as a combat style. In fact, his style is taught all over the world as Gracie Jiu-Jitsu.
I'd like to thank my brother Hardon for creating the show. If it wasn't for him, none of us would be here tonight. Of course, the fans for their support. And Dana White and Zupa. But to have the courage to continue my family create long time back in Brazil, my father, my family. Thank you.
Thank you, Royce. Congratulations.
He won the very first UFC mixed martial arts event with his amazing grappling ability. At the time, there were no weight classes, and fighters kept fighting until they either lost or won it all. This meant Gracie was taking down opponents much bigger than him one after another. Gracie won UFC 1 through 4, and I mean every fight, by way of submission. His undefeated reign as Jiu-Jitsu King came to an end at UFC 5, in a draw against arch-rival Ken Shamrock. These two had what was the first ever UFC rivalry, which fittingly leads us to our next Hall of Famer. Shamrock. Ken Shamrock was a pioneer of mixed martial arts, bringing the hybrid fight style to the mainstream at a time when UFC wasn't about MMA. Between impressive strength, striking ability, and groundwork, Shamrock was always there to challenge Royce Gracie's title. He also stuck around a lot longer than Gracie, going beyond UFC 5 and winning UFC 48 with a solid knee knockout. Throughout his entire career, Shamrock racked up 28 wins, 23 of which came via submission.
And I truly mean that from the bottom of my heart, that I'm standing in this ring, and Royce Gracie standing in this ring, and UFC is still here being able to put on shows, is because of your persistence, the loyal fans in UFC, and I thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. God bless, and we'll see you back in the ring.
Some people critique Shamrock for competing way past his prime, but we're not going to complain about having seen more fights from the Hall of Famer. Shamrock and Gracie were the first fighters inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame. As Dana White put it, we feel that no two individuals are more deserving than Royce and Ken to be the charter members. Their contributions to our sport, both inside and outside the octagon, may never be equaled. Not too far behind those trailblazers is Dan the Beast Severn, who in addition to being a great wrestler also had an amazing mustache. He was the first world-class wrestler to enter the UFC and establish wrestling as a serious skill in the octagon. This paved the way for wrestlers in the UFC such as Don Fry and Mark Coleman. His professional record has Severn competing in 127 matches and winning 101 of them. One of those wins was at UFC 9 against Ken Shamrock. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2005 at UFC 52, 8 years before his retirement.
Joe, it's just fantastic to see the support of the people being out here, seeing the evolution of the athletes themselves, being so multi-versatile. It's an honor and pleasure just to be here and just to see how it has grown into what it is this day.
In the early days, the UFC was dominated by ground game. Wrestlers and jiu-jitsu practitioners were racking up win after win, and Greco-Roman wrestler Randy Couture was no exception. Couture made a name for himself at his debut at UFC 13. He took on Tony Halm, a man 100 pounds heavier, and won in under a minute with a rear naked choke.
Might look to choke here, trying to sink it. Couture trying to sink the choke in that big neck. There's the tap. And he's very quick.
In the finale, Couture took down Stephen Graham with a TKO in the first round. And if that's not enough to intimidate you, he was also a U.S. Army sergeant from 1982 to 1988. Couture's UFC career spanned from 1997 to 2007, bringing us great fights such as his trilogy against Chuck Liddell. Randy finally got inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame in 2006 on the Ultimate Fighter 3 finale. Mark "The Hammer" Coleman was another wrestling force you did not want to mess with. Coleman became the first UFC heavyweight champion after beating Dan Severn with a neck crank submission at UFC 12.
Shift position, and that's it.
Coleman shoved him out. And Severn tapped out. And Coleman's on fire.
During an interview with Joe Rogan, the Hammer stated about opponent Maurice Smith, "I'm going to ground him and pound the god shit out of him," thus starting the ever-popular phrase, ground and pound. Coleman and Couture had the first ever Hall of Famer versus Hall of Famer bout in UFC history. Coleman lost that fight and never returned to MMA, but will always remember how his wrestling skills won him the title of UFC heavyweight champion. If you want to see more great MMA coverage, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Until next time, this is Ultimate MMA.